Tonight, we're going to drift through a strange corridor of science and history. A quiet one that was swept under polished floors and filed away in forgotten cabinets. It's the story of methamphetamine. Not the criminal one you know, but the medical one, the respectable one, the one that wore a white coat and wrote in cursive on prescription pads, the one that whispered into war rooms and presidential offices, the one that stood behind Adolf Hitler with a syringe. But don't worry, this won't be harsh. There's no shouting here. Just soft light, ticking clocks, and the distant sound of glass tapping on steel. Close your eyes now, and imagine a quiet room in Berlin. It's 1944, the war is turning. But the Führer has not slept. On a tray, a silver spoon, a rolled cloth, a vial labeled methamphetamine, 50 mg/ml. His doctor, Theodore Moll, moves slowly, methodically. Not out of calm, but caution. Outside, the world crumbles. But in here, a molecule flows into the vein of a man who thinks he's saving it. Drift with me now, back through time. Back to the laboratory where this began. Before Hitler. Before the war. When it was just a pill on a shelf. A promise in a bottle. A whisper of energy in a weary post-war world. The year is 1937. Berlin exhales a breath it's been holding for years. The shadows of the Great War still linger, but the streets are humming again. New buildings rise where rubble once lay, and the city's pulse is steady, efficient, modern. In the Mid District, past the clatter of trams and the ticking of sidewalk clocks, there's a modest building with sand-colored bricks and tall windows. Nothing about it demands attention. Yet inside, a young chemist named Fritz Hauskald leans over a polished bench, hands gloved, mind sharp. He works for Temmler Work, a pharmaceutical company chasing the same dream many are chasing, energy in a bottle. The interwar years are hard. People are tired. Tired of politics, tired of pain, tired of slow mornings and grey moods. The demand is simple. Give us something to keep going, something clean, reliable, scientific. Hauskald doesn't know what he's making, not really, not in the way we know now. He's following a path set down by Japanese chemists in 1919, who first synthesized methamphetamine crystals from ephedrine, a compound found in plants used for centuries in traditional medicine. But Hauskald refines it, stabilizes it, compresses it into a form the world can swallow. A tiny white tablet, he calls it Pervitin. No smell, no taste, just a quiet hum behind the eyes. At first, its promise is modest. In early trials, volunteers report sharper focus, less hunger, longer work hours, and most appealing of all, a sudden return of optimism. That's the word that echoes through those clinical notes, optimism. Doctors begin prescribing it for everything: low mood, menstrual fatigue, chronic tiredness, post-surgical lethargy, even asthma. Newspaper ads appear in respectable columns. Pervitin, banishing fatigue the scientific way. For the mother, the clerk, the officer, take one and carry on. Even chocolates are laced with it, wrapped in delicate foil, a small indulgence with a big effect. They're sold in cafes, given as gifts, tucked into handbags like perfume. Nobody sees the cliff, only the climb. Temmler's offices fill with requests, orders spike, they can barely keep up with production. Pervitin is not classified as dangerous. Not yet. It's medical, it's modern, it wears a lab coat. It becomes a quiet habit in middle-class homes. Some say it improves relationships. A sharper mind means fewer mistakes. More energy for children, more charm for one's partner, more endurance for one's boss. It was the 1930s version of having it all. And then the military calls. A curious man from the Wehrmacht's medical division visits Temler in late 1938. He is polite, asks many questions, takes notes with tight, perfect handwriting. His interest is professional, of course, the performance of soldiers. In modern war, he explains, victory often belongs not to the strongest, but to the most awake. By early 1939, Pervitin is being tested on German troops. Marching drills, cold nights, no sleep. And still, they keep going. One soldier writes in his diary, "I feel like a machine. I have not slept in 3 days, and yet I am clear. I am unstoppable. There is no inside anymore, only the task." He doesn't know he's describing dissociation. He thinks he's describing victory. That spring, Pervitin is packed into the field kits of paratroopers, tank drivers, and infantrymen. Little white pills in grey paper sleeves, labeled stimulants, nothing more. Each one a whisper in the bloodstream. Stay awake, push further, forget fear. But inside the city, in quiet apartments with iron bed frames and ticking radios, the effects begin to show. A housewife who once felt lifted by Pervitin now can't sleep for more than an hour. A clerk finds his hands trembling. While writing numbers, he doubles the dose to keep steady. A university student, once vibrant, begins to blink slowly at nothing, his thoughts caught in spirals. Doctors notice, but do not yet alarm. They use words like overuse, nervous strain, and temporary dysregulation. Nobody calls it addiction. Because addiction belongs to opium, to back alleys and sailors and shame. Pervitin belongs to professionals, to mothers, to medals, to science. Back in Temler's lab, Fritz Hauschild begins another synthesis. He has no regrets. He's proud. His compound is efficient. His math is precise. He has given the world something it asked for, whether or not it understood what it was asking. And the war drums grow louder. In a room not far away, a man named Dr. Theodore Moll receives a private note. A patient is requesting something new, something that can give him clarity, energy, control. The patient signs the note with one word: Adolf. The curtains in the Reich Chancellery do not move. They are too thick, too heavy, sewn to keep the outside world at bay. Inside, the air is still. Soft yellow light spills from a chandelier, and the faint scent of disinfectant rides the quiet hum of morning. It is 1941. The war is expanding, folding new borders like paper. But here, in this private room, tucked behind layers of security, time behaves differently. There is no shouting. Only the tick of a silver pocket watch, the low whir of a heating unit, and the careful breath of a man preparing a syringe. Dr. Theodore Moll, personal physician to the Führer, known among officers as the Reich Quack, and yet always summoned. He stands beside a narrow couch, his white-gloved hands steady. On the tray beside him, a vial labeled vitamzine, another marked Eucotal, and beneath both, a clear ampule filled with something faintly blue. Temler's finest, methamphetamine. Moll calls it by softer names. Doctor's mixture, energy tonic, stimulant of clarity. He tells the Führer it will help his digestion, his mood, his focus. And it does. At first, Adolf Hitler sits, shirt rolled back from his arm, jaw tense but silent. He doesn't like doctors. But Moll is different. Obedient, discreet, always nearby. The needle slides in. Not a flinch, not a sound, only a sharp inhale. And then, a strange calm. Within minutes, the tired weight behind Hitler's eyes lifts. His thoughts sharpen. Colors seem clearer. The day feels conquerable again. He rises from the couch and begins to pace. Orders are issued. Maps are consulted. Words flow. Grand visions return. Mole watches. He does not smile. He notes the reaction, writes something in a small leather notebook, and prepares the next day's dose. No one else is allowed to read these notes. Not even Hitler. The doctor's privacy is absolute. The injections become routine. Daily, sometimes twice. Mole adjusts the ingredients often. He mixes methamphetamine with small amounts of oxycodone, caffeine, belladonna, even animal hormone extracts. A cocktail of chemistry designed not just to energize, but to maintain illusion. Illusion of control, of strength, of certainty. In a world unraveling, this becomes its own kind of power. Some staff begin to notice changes. They whisper about the Führer's jittering hands, his sudden anger, his pacing until dawn, his inability to rest, his glassy-eyed monologues, his loss of appetite. But none dare speak too loudly. Mole is always near, always watching, always carrying his black leather case, filled with tiny vials, clean needles, and quiet authority. By 1943, the injections number over 80 per month. Methamphetamine remains one of the most frequent components. It is not called that, of course. On the labels, it hides beneath proprietary names, beneath Latin roots. But it is there, pushing the body past its warning signs, flooding the brain with false triumph. Sometimes Mole skips a dose, just to see. The results are dramatic. Exhaustion, paranoia, pain in the stomach, withdrawal hidden behind military jargon. So the next dose is restored, and the storm quiets for a while. Hitler comes to believe he cannot function without Mole's medicine. He praises his doctor in public, calls him my miracle worker, protector of my health, but only when the injections are fresh in his veins. By evening, the shadows return. By morning, they are gone again. Thus the cycle continues. A rhythm of dependence. A nation's leader bound to a bottle. And yet, outside these walls, methamphetamine is still handed out by the box. Soldiers carry Pervitin like rations. Officers write glowing reports about alertness, bravery, and tireless energy. Few mention the crashing lows, the tremors, the strange dreams, the way the men begin to mutter at night. In medical journals, the tone begins to shift. A few doctors raise concerns. Words like overstimulation, neurotoxicity, and psychosis appear in careful German. But they are not heard in Berlin. Not yet. Not behind the velvet curtains. Not in the morning stillness of the chancellery, where a man sits waiting for his injection and a doctor gently presses the plunger. The meth keeps flowing. The mind keeps racing. And outside, the world begins to burn. Imagine a soldier on a long march. The road is quiet. Boots thud in rhythm with the breath. Not a storm of battle. Just the cold stretch between villages. Miles melting beneath gray skies. His pack is heavy, but his legs do not shake. His eyes stay open, dry and wide. There's a pill in his bloodstream now. A little white disc swallowed after morning roll call. Issued with a nod and no instruction. No ceremony. No warning. It is called Pervitin. A gift from the medical division. A secret tool of the Wehrmacht. They called it the stimulans. Sometimes the Stuka tablet. It came in tidy boxes, stamped with a red cross, stacked beside field rations and bandages. Standard issue. Standard hope. Blitzkrieg was not just a tactic. It was a tempo, a storm of motion. No pause, no waiting, no sleep. To keep the tanks rolling and the minds sharp, soldiers were told to push forward, to keep going. One more hour, one more town, one more border. And the meth allowed it, at least for a while. Letters sent home in spring 1940 read like praise songs. We have not slept in 3 nights, but the spirit is good. Eyes clear, head focused, hands strong. I feel the war in my blood. They thought they were becoming machines. Vaster, harder, more efficient. But inside the soft folds of their brains, something else was happening. Neurons began to reroute. Dopamine surged like floodwater, soaking the pleasure centers, leaving nothing behind when it receded. Sleep became distant. Dreams stopped arriving. Thoughts looped like film reels left running. The pill didn't just remove tiredness. It removed pause. And without pause, there can be no reflection, no mourning, no doubt, just momentum, just forward. Some men took it once or twice, some every day. A few took 6, 10, even 20 pills at once, chasing something that could never be caught. And when the effects wore off, they crashed. Body trembling, skin cold, minds unmoored. Officers began requesting more boxes. Morale is improved, they wrote. Alertness excellent. They did not mention the tremors, the paranoia, the weeping in foxholes. A handful of field medics raised quiet concern. One noted that soldiers were hallucinating, mistaking wind for whispers, shadows for orders. Another described a man who marched for 3 days and collapsed, not from wounds, but from silence. Still, the tablets kept coming, manufactured by the millions, stored in tins, carried in pockets, pressed into palms by trembling fingers. Because methamphetamine was not seen as poison. It was science, German science, precise, reliable, modern. It did not smell of drugs or vice. It smelled like oil and iron. Progress. And the soldiers, drifting through ruined towns and unfamiliar languages, clung to its clarity. It was a light inside the fog, until even that light began to flicker. Some officers noticed strange behaviors, uncharacteristic rage, tics, speech that moved too quickly, sleeplessness that went on for days. One general reported that his staff had become irritable and strange. Another quietly removed the pills from ration packs, but others doubled their dosage. Because for every soldier who collapsed, 10 more pushed forward. And that was enough. Just enough to delay the cost. Just enough to believe. This miracle in a bottle was not a trick of chemistry, but a gift of strength. Back at Temler's headquarters, the machines ran day and night. Pervitin flowed from the presses like coins. No one questioned the volume, only the speed, only the numbers, only the weight of each box, as it crossed the border between science and war. And somewhere far from the factories, in a forest near Smolensk, a soldier stares at the snow. His hands are shaking, his eyes are open, but he is no longer marching. No longer dreaming, only waiting for the pill to wear off or begin again. He doesn't know the war is turning. He doesn't know the world will one day forget his name. But the tablet is still there in his pocket, pressed flat by the weight of time. And in Berlin, behind silent curtains, a needle waits in its case. The walls of the chancellery feel tighter now, the air heavier. The windows stay shut even on warm afternoons. Hitler rarely leaves his quarters. The war outside has changed shape. The victories come slower. The radio no longer plays marches, only news. And yet, inside these quiet rooms, the rhythm of the day remains unchanged. At the same hour, with the same measured steps, Dr. Theodore Moll enters with his case. It clicks open like a clock striking noon. Inside, a gleaming row of ampules, neatly labeled, perfectly aligned. Methamphetamine is no longer enough. The injections now include a carousel of compounds: oxycodone, atropine, caffeine, hormones extracted from pigs and bulls, enzymes for digestion, barbiturates to soften the edges, stimulants to sharpen them again. Each one measured in quiet confidence, each one introduced with gentle words. The stomach will calm. The voice will be strong again. You will feel clear. Hitler no longer asks what is inside. He only asks when. His trust in Moll is absolute, not out of warmth, but necessity. Because without the injection, the body rebels. His limbs grow stiff. His digestion ceases. His speech turns slow and uncertain. The meth no longer lifts him. It simply holds him in place, like scaffolding, like wire. And so Moll continues. Each morning, a needle into the arm. Each evening, another. No blood tests, no second opinions, no records shared beyond the two of them. Moll keeps notes, but they're written in a private code. Doses become vague. X compound, Y response. No one else understands them. That is the point. By late 1944, Moll is administering nearly 90 injections per month, sometimes more. The meth is now delivered intravenously, in higher doses, more frequently. But Hitler's body is no longer cooperative. His left hand begins to tremble. He walks with a stiff leg. He slurs certain words. His pupils stay dilated, even in low light. The doctor explains these as minor circulatory disruptions. Nothing alarming, nothing new. But inside, the nervous system is unraveling. The meth, once alight, now casts shadows. Thought loops grow tighter. Ideas fixate. Decisions narrow. The man who once commanded vast theaters of war now obsesses over troop movements on hand-drawn maps, shouting at generals for phantom mistakes. He becomes paranoid, suspicious of his own staff. He isolates. He no longer sleeps more than a few hours. When he does, his dreams are strange. He wakes in sweat, calls for Moll. Another injection, another calm, another thread woven into the cocoon. Outside, Berlin groans under the weight of bombing. The people ration food, gather in bunkers, wait in silence. But inside these sealed quarters, the war seems distant, replaced by syringes, small bottles, and a doctor's constant whisper. Some officers grow concerned. They question Mall behind closed doors. They note the Fuhra's mood swings. His memory lapses. His sudden fatigue followed by bursts of agitation. But no one dares remove the doctor. He holds too much, knows too much, is trusted too deeply. Mall begins adding Eucotal, a strong opioid, to balance the rising restlessness, to soften the come down. This creates a strange rhythm. Meth in the morning, morphine at night, stimulation, sedation, a seesaw of chemistry, carrying a man who can no longer walk alone. And still the world spins on. Still the war continues. Still the syringe glints in the morning light. The man who built a regime on control has lost the one thing he cannot admit needing: a drug, a doctor, a dose. And so the injections continue. Like prayer, like ritual, like the sound of breath before sleep. But beneath the skin, the body keeps score, and it is running out of space. The walls of Berlin begin to thin. Not physically, but perceptually. News slips in through the cracks. Rumors, statistics, defeats wrapped in silence. Within the city's academic halls and medical schools, a quiet shift begins. Methamphetamine, once embraced without hesitation, now feels inconvenient. Not useless, not yet, but questionable. Not quite the scientific jewel it had once seemed. Doctors no longer display Pervitin on their desks. The samples remain in drawers, but the pride is gone. Medical journals begin to carry cooler language. Less praise, more caution. Words like tolerance, cardiotoxicity, and psychomotor disturbance begin to appear in the lower paragraphs of polite clinical observations. But no headlines, no alarm bells. Science here moves with decorum. At Temler's central office, production continues. The machines hiss and press. Tablets fall into jars. Labels are printed. Orders still arrive from the Wehrmacht, though slightly reduced, slightly slower. No one speaks of withdrawal, only reduced operational endurance. A language built to conceal, a system trained to maintain rhythm, no matter how discordant the melody becomes. In a back room, a pharmacist quietly switches his preferred stimulant. A milder compound. He prescribes it to himself. No one asks why. A general physician writes to a colleague, "I have noticed increasing nervous tension among my younger patients. They ask for more Pervitin. They say they feel hollow without it." He does not call it dependency, just a pattern, something to observe, not yet to name. In the AIM week, a government health official quietly suggests that the public distribution of meth-based stimulants be limited. No banned, just limited. There are no memos, just a whispered understanding. The tide is turning, but not for everyone. Some physicians continue prescribing without hesitation. Habit, perhaps, or belief, or simply exhaustion. They have been trained to treat symptoms, not systems, and methamphetamine erases symptoms. Temporarily, reliably. A tired mother with 5 children under 6. A Pervitin tablet makes the day possible. A man who lost his job and now paces his apartment at night, unable to stop thinking. Pervitin helps him work longer, So he forgets. And for those too fatigued to rise, meth is still marketed as the light. In pharmacies, the packaging remains unchanged. A clean white label, red letters, simple promises. But the clientele shifts. Less elite, more desperate, and the pharmacists begin to notice the eyes. Too wide, too fast, sometimes glassy, sometimes pleading. Still, the transaction continues, because until it is outlawed, it is legal. And what is legal feels safe, even as science begins to tiptoe away, even as the journals grow colder, even as Maul increases Hitler's dosage, even as soldiers on the front lines begin to refuse their tablets, not out of rebellion, out of exhaustion. One soldier, in a letter never delivered, writes, "I took the pill and I walked all night. But when the morning came, I could no longer feel my hands, and I did not know where I was, or who I had been before the marching." The letter was found years later, stuffed inside a boot, folded neatly, signed without a name. It was never read aloud, not in any classroom, not in any museum, but somewhere in Temler's factory. The presses kept moving, not as fast, not forever, but long enough for 1,000 more pills to be swallowed by hands that didn't know what they were holding. And back in Berlin, in the inner room with the thick curtains, Dr. Maul prepares another syringe. The labels are more complex now, the ingredients harder to trace, but the routine is unchanged. The patient waits, the doctor delivers, and the world outside continues to dim. The air beneath the ground is still, not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of absence. The Führer bunker lies beneath the Chancellery garden, a hushed warren of corridors and concrete rooms. It is April 1945. Berlin groans above like a machine breaking down. Shells echo in the distance. Close, closer, then pause, then again. But below, time does not advance. It only thickens. The fluorescent lights buzz faintly. The air smells of oil, damp stone, and the chalky sweetness of medical alcohol. In one of the rooms, lined with maps that no longer mean anything, Adolf Hitler sits on a narrow bed. His left hand trembles steadily. His right leg moves with stiff reluctance. He no longer walks far, no longer eats much. His voice comes in bursts, sometimes clear, sometimes slurred. But one thing remains constant. Dr. Theodore Maul, still nearby, still watching, still opening the black case each morning. The injections continue, smaller now, more frequent, measured not by need, but by ritual. Methamphetamine is still there, not alone, but still present, mixed now with more powerful sedatives and painkillers too potent for the living. It is not about stimulation anymore. It is about containment. The body resists. The mind flickers. The man who once commanded entire continents now repeats phrases under his breath, as if trying to summon clarity by force. Maul watches. He administers. He records. He does not object. Even now, in the end, he believes in his medicine, in the power of control through chemistry, in the calm that comes after the needle. Outside, the Soviet forces are moving through Berlin. Block by block, street by street. Their footsteps are not yet heard in the bunker, but their presence is already felt. The bunker's corridors grow quieter. Some staff are gone. Others simply do not speak. Time folds in on itself. There is no longer morning or night, just intervals, marked by injections, marked by breaths. Witnesses later describe Hitler as increasingly detached, not just from the war, but from everything. His gaze flickers past people. His words loop. He forgets, then insists, then forgets again. Moll notes his digestion has stopped. He administers a mixture of belladonna and atropine. He adds glucose to the meth to avoid a crash. He lowers the barbiturate dose, then raises it again. Each change brings a moment of stillness, then more unraveling. And still, every morning, the needle finds its mark. It is one of the last things the body accepts without resistance. Near the end, Moll is dismissed, quietly, without ceremony. Some say Hitler feared betrayal. Others say he simply no longer recognized the man. But the damage is done. The chemistry has carved its path. The body is not what it was. The mind no longer trusts itself. The injections cease. The war does not. And in that final week, when silence begins to hum louder than orders, when the world narrows to a single underground hallway, there are no more tablets, no more formulas, only time, only breath, and then only memory. Above ground, Temler's records are scattered by fire and retreat. Production stops. The factory is quiet. No one speaks of methamphetamine. Not in the open. Not anymore. And in the years that follow, a new story will be written. One that names other villains, other molecules, other wars. But the pill remains. The molecule persists. It changes shape, moves to new corners of the world, finds new hosts. But it was here first, in Berlin, in boardrooms and bunkers, in doctors' hands and trembling veins. And though the war ends, its chemistry continues. The guns fell silent in May. The documents were signed. The war, at least in name, was over. Berlin was no longer a capital, just a shape beneath dust. Its buildings cracked, its streets divided, its past suspended in the air. And in the soft gray that followed, things were moved, classified, rewritten. Temler's facilities were seized. Some records burned, others boxed, numbered, and forgotten. The name Pervitin stopped appearing in public. Pharmacies removed the bottles quietly. No announcements, no apologies, just absence. Doctors were told not to renew prescriptions. Supplies were recalled. No official statement was issued. There didn't need to be. Methamphetamine was no longer medicine. It had become something else, something that could not be explained. Without saying too much, the medical journals shifted their focus. New compounds, new cures, new frontiers. The word stimulant became less fashionable. Balance was in vogue. Natural recovery, holistic care. But in the shadows, the molecule waited. Because meth is not an idea. It is a shape. a simple arrangement of atoms, and it does not forget how to enter the bloodstream or the brain. In the post-war years, methamphetamine began to appear in different hands. Not scientists, not soldiers, but truck drivers, factory workers, students, criminals, and chemists without credentials. The formula leaked, was copied, changed, distilled. No more polished tablets, no labels in Latin, just powder, or crystals, or bitter-tasting shards wrapped in foil. A new name took hold. Meth, shorter, sharper. It no longer wore a lab coat. It wore street clothes. It moved through basements and parking lots. It whispered to different kinds of tired people. And science looked away. For a time, because to look too closely meant retracing steps. Back to Berlin. Back to the hospitals. Back to the bunker. Back to the syringe. So the books closed. The lectures moved on. The molecule disappeared from the syllabus. But in quiet corners, a few remembered. A retired doctor in Munich who once prescribed it to his wife for fatigue. A nurse who recalled chocolates with a curious aftertaste. A chemist who knew the original compound by heart and made it again in secret. And the strange thing was, it still worked, just as Housechild had designed it, just as Moll had used it, just as millions had swallowed it. With water, with hope, with trust, methamphetamine remains chemically simple, elegant even. A ring, a branch, a few small atoms holding hands. Its effect, vast, fierce, familiar, have not changed. Only the setting has, only the story. Today it is spoken of in headlines. Crisis, addiction, illicit, uncontrolled. But it was not always so. Once it sat in a cabinet beside aspirin. Once it came wrapped in silk ribbon. Once it passed from doctor to patient. With a smile. History forgets selectively, but chemistry does not. And if you look closely, in the footnotes, in the margins, in the quiet folds of old books, you will still find its name. Pervitin, a promise that turned into something else. A medicine that kept marching, long after the war had stopped. The war was over, but the hunger for energy remained. In America, the 1950s came like a breath of polished air. New cars, clean sidewalks, children with pressed collars, a nation with forward motion in its blood. And somewhere beneath the hum of progress, the molecule waited, not in basements this time, but in offices, in white paper boxes, stamped, disoxin. It sounded medical, authoritative, safe, the active ingredient, methamphetamine hydrochloride. It had crossed the ocean without needing a passport. It entered the US pharmacopoeia in a lab coat and tie, originally synthesized again by American researchers who knew where the threads led, but did not tug. Because disoxin was helpful, it kept pilots awake on long training missions. It kept us line workers focused, as the country built everything at once. Cars, planes, machines, the future. And it did more. Doctors began prescribing it to housewives, with quiet weariness behind their eyes. Not sadness, exactly. Not illness. Just tiredness. A kind of fading. They called it neurotic fatigue. A phrase made of silk and starch. Disoxin came in small white tablets, taken once in the morning, sometimes again after lunch. Suddenly, the world was brighter. Tasks flowed. The house gleamed. The children laughed. The mind buzzed with crisp edges. Sleep could wait. And so it did. Advertisements ran in medical journals. Disoxin for productivity without pause. Keep your patients focused, alert, balanced. It was prescribed for weight loss, for mild depression, for attention problems in children. Yes, children. Pediatric doses were carefully calibrated. Doctors tracked behavior. Smiles returned. Report cards improved. It seemed like a solution, a pill for the modern world. There were some who cautioned. A few neurologists mentioned overstimulation. A psychiatrist in Chicago noted emotional flattening. Another observed that withdrawal symptoms appeared if a dose was missed. But the reports were quiet. The results were loud. And so disoxin remained. In offices, in medicine cabinets, in school nurse drawers. The meth molecule now lived behind words like focus, clarity, and modern efficiency. It was Pervitin anymore. It was Hitler's syringe. It wasn't the soldier's pocket tablet. It was progress. The chemistry hadn't changed, only the costume. And still, people began to notice subtle shifts. A woman whose productivity soared for 6 months suddenly found herself unable to sleep for 3 days. A boy who sat still in class began to grow anxious at night. A young man, prescribed disoxin to help finish law school, kept asking for higher doses. The molecule did not mind. It was doing what it was built to do, flooding the mind with reward, delaying fatigue, replacing pause with motion. By the late 1960s, regulators began to ask questions. Not loudly, not accusingly, just questions. Should we reduce the available dosage? Should we limit prescriptions to fewer days? Should we study the long-term effects? But by then, the molecule had already left the labs. It had become cultural. It had made its way into diets, into workplace rituals, into suburban mornings, and in dark corners. Some had learned to extract it, to purify, to smoke, to inject. Disoxin's clean white border was starting to blur. Still, it was not banned. Not yet. Because it worked. And because no one wanted to revisit where it came from. Because behind its American smile stood a history no one wished to remember. Berlin, bunkers, papers in malls, handwriting. A line from one war, drawn through another. But the molecule did not forget. It waited, quietly, everywhere. By the time the 1970s arrived, disoxin had changed hands too many times. Once passed politely across pharmacy counters, it now slipped through shadows. The molecule, still unchanged in structure, had changed entirely in meaning. No longer medicine, not even modern. Now it was a danger, a threat, a story told in the language of police reports. Syringes, sirens, and broken teeth. But the shift didn't happen all at once. At first, meth just slipped out the back door of the clinic. A pharmacist's extra bottle, a half-filled prescription, a lab tech with too much knowledge, and too few rules. It was easy to make. That was the problem. The recipe, once protected by patents, was now floating through underground conversations. Not just chemists, tinkerers, drifters, amateurs. They began to cook it themselves. In garages, in barns, in motels. The scent changed. The texture changed. It was no longer a pill. It became powder, then crystal, smoked, snorted, injected, named again. Crank, glass, Tina, ice. Words that shimmered with menace. Words that separated it from its past, from its polished beginnings, from its white-coated birth. And the people who used it changed too. Or so the story went. No longer housewives, no longer pilots. Now it was addicts, outlaws, ghosts at the edge of cities. Magazines ran photos of sunken faces. Television showed raids. Labs wrapped in yellow tape. Authorities in hazmat suits. Meth was no longer a molecule. It was a crisis, a myth, a monster. But in truth, it was still itself. The same atomic structure. Once sold in Berlin cafes. Once swallowed before battlefield marches. Once delivered by syringe into trembling arms beneath chandeliers. The world had simply decided to see it differently. In the 1980s and 90s, methamphetamine became a symbol of rural decay, of urban collapse, of helplessness. Politicians used it as punctuation, a way to talk about crime, about poverty, about decline, but almost never about science, almost never about chemistry. No one mentioned Temla, or Housechild, or the chocolate boxes in 1930s pharmacies. No one mentioned Mall, or the bunkers, or the quiet rooms in Berlin. The story was rewritten. Meth became a modern plague, a foreign invader, a product of failure. And yet, even at the height of fear, the pharmaceutical version was never banned completely. Disoxin still existed, still does, prescribed in rare cases, under heavy regulation. Its name no longer spoken aloud, just circled on insurance forms, whispered between specialists, allowed, but not celebrated, because to celebrate it would require remembering what it once was, and who it once served, and what it once promised. But memory, like sleep, can be selective, and the world chose to forget. Only the molecule remembered. Stable, precise, always ready, and it waits still, in vials, in labs, in quiet corners of the mind, where energy is low, and memory grows faint, and someone reaches for something that works, even now, even here. Meth does not judge. It only enters, and changes, and stays. Imagine your brain not as a machine, but as a garden, a quiet one, paths lined with moss, faint streams flowing beneath, every leaf a thought, every root a memory, and deep in the center, the soil that makes everything grow, Now imagine that into this garden comes a single drop. Clear, bitter, electric. It's not loud. It does not burn, but it changes everything. That drop is methamphetamine, and the first place it touches is the reward pathway, the soft spiral of neurons that tells you when something feels good. Eating, laughing, solving a puzzle, touching someone's hand. All these things release a soft pulse of dopamine, a chemical light that says, yes, do that again. The system is delicate, rhythmic, balanced, but meth doesn't play by that rhythm. It crashes in, releases dopamine all at once. Not in a ripple, in a wave, a flood that drowns hesitation. The body warms, the eyes sharpen, the heart beats faster, and the brain whispers, this is everything. The garden lights up. Every branch gleams. Every flower blooms at once. And that's the problem. Because when everything feels that good, nothing else compares. The garden remembers. It waits. It wants the flood again. Even after the light fades. Even when the leaves wilt. Even when the roots begin to crack. The more often the molecule returns, the harder it becomes to find joy in small things. A meal, a song, a breeze. They no longer bring dopamine on their own. The garden has been rewired. And with that rewiring comes another loss. Sleep, which is the gardener's rest. The time when memories are sorted, emotions folded, cells repaired. Meth takes that away. It stimulates wakefulness by blocking the chemicals that signal time to rest. You do not feel tired, but you are. You do not sleep, but you must. And without sleep, the brain forgets how to be itself. The boundary between real and imagined softens. Thoughts loop, fears echo, memories blur. You see shadows that aren't there. Hear your name in silence. You blink, and the garden becomes a maze. That is the cost. But the brain tries to recover. It pulls back. It reduces dopamine receptors. It shields itself, tries to restore rhythm, to prune what has overgrown. Yet this healing is slow, and the memory of light remains. That is what makes meth so powerful. Not just the rush, but the absence that follows. A kind of chemical longing, a silence that feels too loud. Some recover, with rest, with time, with care. The garden does not forget, but it can regrow. Gently, quietly, but others return to the drop. Not for pleasure anymore, but to feel normal, to silence the quiet, to chase the echo of that first light. And meth, still simple, still small, still itself, does not resist. It enters again, and begins again, not with violence, not with fire, but with chemistry. A whisper in the garden, a flood in the roots, and so the cycle turns. Still, soft, endlessly precise. Not all use is reckless. Not all craving is chaos. Sometimes methamphetamine wears a watch, punches in, follows orders, smiles politely. Even today, it moves quietly through systems that depend on endurance. Start with the military, across nations, across decades. Fatigue is a liability. A sleeping soldier is a vulnerable one. A pilot nodding off at 30,000 feet is a danger beyond measure. So stimulants are issued. Not always meth, but sometimes, or something close. The molecule may be altered, branded anew, but the effect is familiar. Eyes stay open, minds stay sharp, hands do not shake, at least not yet. In field manuals, the language is clinical. Go pills, alertness aids, controlled stimulants under supervision. No mention of longing. No mention of rewired neurons or forgotten dreams. Only results. And results are compelling. In long-haul trucking, the story echoes. Endless highways, thin sleep, deadlines that defy biology. Drivers whisper about the clear stuff. Small doses, just to push through the night, just until the next stop. Some are prescribed by doctors, others not. But the logic is the same. Stay awake, stay useful, stay ahead. The molecule fits perfectly into modern needs. In hospitals, a patient may be given disoxin for treatment-resistant ADHD. Under strict rules, measured doses, monthly reviews. The pharmacist does not flinch. The label is clean. The pill is white. The signature is real. But still, it is meth. The same structure, the same fire beneath the glass. Its presence is not loud, but it is there. Even students, racing against exams, sometimes find their way to stimulants, often prescribed, sometimes borrowed, rarely questioned, because tiredness is a liability, and ambition does not sleep. And meth, or its siblings, make the day longer, make the night shorter, make the hours between feel like something you can hold. But this use is not chaotic. It is patterned, systemic, respected even, which makes it harder to see, because the line between help and harm is not drawn in dosage. It is drawn in silence, in what is not spoken, in what is tolerated, in what is forgotten. When the body begins to rely on chemistry for clarity, when sleep becomes optional, when emotion dims beneath focus, something changes. Not loudly, not suddenly, just gradually, until the idea of rest feels like a weakness, until pleasure comes only in motion, until stopping hurts more than going, and still the world applauds. Another task completed, another hour conquered, another day optimized. Meth does not mind applause. It asks for nothing. It just continues, moving through hands that need it, or think they do, or were told they should. And somewhere in that quiet movement, the original story is lost. No one remembers the chemist, or the factory, or the chocolates, or the trembling hand beneath the chandelier. Only the task remains. The job, the deadline, the test, the shift, and the pill that makes it possible. Even if it costs sleep, even if it costs joy, even if it costs memory. The world does not ask where energy comes from, only that it arrives. And methamphetamine, ever loyal, still answers. What does a drug change when it enters not just the body, but the mind that names the body. What does meth take? Not from your bloodstream, but from the quiet language you used to say, "I am me." Because long after the first dose fades, long after the crash, long after the detox, something lingers. A tilt in memory, a soft blur in the mirror, a pause before answering the question, "How are you?" Methamphetamine does not erase. It rewrites, not all at once, but line by line, small edits, until the paragraph reads differently, until the self sounds strange. At first, you feel more you. Sharpened, efficient, clear, a better version. The version you always hoped you'd be. But it's not a better self. It's a louder one. And the quiet parts shrink. Joy becomes narrowed. Not expansive and slow, but focused, intense, short-lived. Things once loved feel muted. Conversations become puzzles to solve. Laughter becomes utility. Sleep becomes theft. And eventually, what matters is no longer the world, but the rhythm of the dose, the weight, the light, the come down, the cycle. Your days begin to orbit it, like gravity, soft, invisible, unbreakable. You stop asking what you want. You ask what will keep you going, what will maintain the thread, what will postpone the unraveling. And somewhere in that compromise, identity begins to shift. You are no longer a person with a habit. You are a habit with a face. Friends notice first, but not through confrontation, through distance, a thinning of laughter, a shortening of calls, a sense that something is misaligned. And you notice it too, but from the inside, a sense that you are watching yourself, that you are playing a role, that there is a delay between thought and feeling. Some call this disconnection, others call it protection, but it is a symptom of too many floods, too many sparks, too many mornings bought from chemistry. And yet, the story does not have to end there, because identity, like the brain, can repair, not with speed, not with ease, but with time. Sleep returns, not at first, not soundly, but slowly, and dreams begin to stretch again. Pleasure widens, the color in music, the breath in silence, the taste of something without stimulation. And memory softens. You don't forget what happened, but it becomes less sharp, less total, less you. And the question changes. Not how do I quit, but who was I before? And can I find that person again? The answer is not always clear, but it begins quietly, with small rituals, with letting the guard regrow, with forgiving the parts that forgot how to rest. And meth, it does not resist. It simply fades when it is no longer invited, because it never claimed to stay forever. It only asked to enter. And now, you are the one who chooses the door. All of it. The factories, the prescriptions, the bunkers, the stolen nights, began with a shape. Not a grand one, not visible to the eye, but exact. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, a ring, a tail, a pair of mirrored branches. Methamphetamine, a molecule so small, It floats unseen through liquid. So light, it rides a breeze inside a lab. So stable, it waits patiently for warmth, for entry, for a path into the bloodstream. It looks harmless, mathematically elegant. A single methyl group added to its gentler cousin, amphetamine. That one addition, a slight rearrangement of parts, makes all the difference. More potent, more durable, more able to cross the blood-brain barrier. That barrier is meant to protect us, to shield the brain from what does not belong. But meth knows how to slip through. It knows how to speak the language of access. It is not violent. It is simply permitted. Once inside, it moves with purpose. It doesn't destroy cells directly. It speaks to them in the chemical dialect of dopamine and norepinephrine. It doesn't ask. It instructs. Release. More. Now. And the neurons obey. Not because they're weak, but because that's their function. To respond to signals. To trust the message. Meth is a master of mimicry. It pretends to be natural. And in some ways, it is. Everything it touches already exists inside you. It doesn't invent pleasure. It just unlocks the vault. All at once. No key. No warning. And after that, the body learns. The brain learns. Even the immune system learns. Not just what the molecule does, but how it feels. That's the true power of chemistry. Not just action, but memory. Meth leaves traces, not just in blood, but in behavior, in preference, in rhythm. The same molecule can save a life or hollow one, depending on the dose, the delivery, the name on the labels. Science knows this. It always has, which is why methamphetamine was never declared evil. Only misused, only misunderstood. Because in truth, it is neither a demon nor a savior. It is a shape, one of millions, no more moral than salt, no less precise than sugar. But history gave it context, and context gave it meaning, and meaning gave it shadow. So now, when we say its name, we forget the structure. We see only the damage, or the allure, or the past, but not the pattern of atoms, not the simplicity, not the silence. And perhaps it is good that we do not see it that way. Perhaps it's better to fear what must be feared, to regulate what must be controlled. But sometimes it is worth remembering that even the most dangerous things begin with a simple arrangement. A few atoms in a line, a ring with a tail, a formula that fits. And once it fits, it never quite leaves. There is a moment when science leaves the laboratory and enters the mind, not through fact, but through story. And once methamphetamine passed that threshold, it stopped being a molecule. It became something else. It became a symbol, a warning, a monster, not in white coats and pill bottles, but in newsprint and cinema, in grainy photos, in whispered rumors. The headlines came first. Sharp, vast, framed in urgency. New epidemic. Faces of meth. The drug that devours. Language turned vivid. Violent. Sensational. Suddenly, meth wasn't just a drug. It was a creature. It eats skin. It destroys families. It rots the soul. None of these are chemical properties, but they became the truth. Because myth is not about fact. It is about feeling. And meth made people feel something. Repulsion, fear, fascination. Television shows gave it a face. A plotline, a villain, a genius, a decline. It was no longer a substance, but a character, woven into the archetype of the fallen man. The haunted town, the glassy-eyed warning. Even the visuals became standardized. The before and after, the sunken cheek, the shaking hand, the empty gaze. No mention of dosage, no context of life, only the outcome, frozen in place, held up for caution. And in that display, meth lost its nuance. Gone was the history. Gone was the pharmacist. Gone were the housewives of the 1950s. The soldiers in the forest. The students at their desks. What remained was a monster, one with many faces, all suffering, all too late. But monsters are useful. They make policy easier. They make morality simpler. They make distance feel safe. You are not like them. You would never take that path. You are awake for the right reasons, tired for noble ones. And the story goes on. Meth is not taught in chemistry classes as a case study in human need. It is taught in criminology, in social work, in health campaigns with Grace, ale filters. But the molecule itself is unchanged. Still small, still precise, still capable of what it has always done. Only now, it wears a costume stitched by culture. Its name arrives before its structure. Its fear precedes its facts. This is not unique to meth. Other compounds have walked this path. Opium, LSD, cocaine. They enter the world quietly, through science, through medicine. Then something happens. A war, a movement, a crisis, and suddenly they are no longer tools. They are stories, carried by symbols, not by understanding. Meth's story is one of extremes. From the polished desk, to the locked basement, from the gentle prescription, to the glass pipe, and the truth, the boring, complicated chemical truth, is lost between them. But perhaps that is how we survive what we fear. By turning it into legend. By making it large, then locking it outside. Still somewhere, a molecule waits. Neither hero nor villain. Just a shape, just a pattern, just a possibility. And beneath all the noise, that story still whispers. Pause for a moment, not to judge, not to analyze, just to notice. The story of methamphetamine is long, but its center is simple. A question: what are we willing to trade for energy? Because energy, in the world we have made, is currency, a badge, a virtue. We praise the early riser, the late worker, the parent who does everything, the student who doesn't sleep. We call them committed, driven, successful, and tiredness. We treat that like weakness, a flaw to be fixed, a setting to be adjusted, a problem to medicate. Meth in all its forms, offered a solution, not just to fatigue, but to the deeper fear beneath it, the fear of slowing down. Because what happens when we slow down? We feel, we remember, we face the emptiness between tasks, the quiet between thoughts, and that stillness can feel unbearable. So we chase motion. And meth, whether as Pervitin, disoxin, or crystal, was simply an instrument of that motion, a chemical denial of rest, not just for war, not just for work, but for identity, to feel capable, to feel sharp, to feel enough. That is the hunger beneath the hunger. It isn't always dark. It isn't always wrong, but it is constant. And meth, with its perfect mimicry of motivation, fit the need too well. So well, we forgot to ask what it was costing. Because when energy is purchased through chemistry, it comes with interest. And over time, the debt grows, sleep vanishes, joy flattens, choice narrows. And the irony is, the more meth promises control, the more it takes it away. Not all at once, not with force, but gradually, softly, like water washing away a name written in sand. And when it's gone, what remains is not the person who started the journey, but someone who doesn't remember what it was like to rest without permission. But still, this story isn't only about meth. It's about us. The molecule is just a mirror. It reflects the way we worship output, the way we ignore the body's signals, the way we label fatigue as failure. What would change if we honored slowness, if we saw rest not as surrender, but as wisdom? What would happen if energy wasn't the only thing we measured? If presence counted, if softness counted, if simply being counted? Meth cannot answer that. It only does what it was built to do. But we can relearn the rhythm, the cycles, the pauses that restore. Because the opposite of meth is not sobriety, it's balance, breath, permission to stop, to sleep, to feel, to wait, and maybe to remember that we were never machines, just humans in need of light, but also of darkness, in need of motion, but also of quiet, and somewhere in between, something like peace. It was once prescribed to mothers who could no longer get out of bed, to students who couldn't concentrate, to workers crushed under post-war exhaustion. Methamphetamine was a tool, a solution, an answer. Doctors meant well. They believed in chemistry. They believed in relief. And in some cases, it worked. It brought people back to their lives, gave them energy, focus, even joy. A tablet in the morning, a light in the mind. The day seemed possible again. That was the promise. And for a while, the promise held. But slowly, quietly, something shifted. Because meth doesn't only bring energy, it also brings pressure. The pressure to maintain that energy, to never let it drop, to stay in motion, to keep improving. And the body, the mind, the soul, they are not built for endless performance. They bend, they break, they call for pause. But the molecule says, one more hour, one more task, One more dose, and soon, function becomes dependence. The pill meant to restore becomes the reason for collapse. The clarity fades. The mind fogs. The very symptoms it once treated. Fatigue, anxiety, isolation come back stronger. But now, there's a silence beneath them. A missing piece. A flicker where selfhood once stood. Because meth doesn't just energize. It rearranges. It carves grooves in behavior. It trains thought into patterns. You stop asking, what do I feel? You ask, when is my next dose? And slowly, the inner voice dims. The one that laughed. The one that paused. The one that knew when enough was enough. That voice isn't destroyed, but it gets quieter, harder to find. This is the strange irony. The medicine meant to bring people back to themselves is the same compound that can take them further away. Not by malice, not by mistake, just by repetition. Because the brain learns, it adapts, it builds habits out of chemistry, and it forgets how things felt before the molecule arrived. But that forgetting is not permanent. Recovery is not a war. It is a remembering, a slow retracing of steps, a reconnection with the parts that were quieted. And the molecule, it doesn't fight, it doesn't protest, it just leaves. Eventually, the body aches, the mind wanders, sleep returns in fragments, emotion stirs, tentative and raw. And with time, sometimes a long time, function returns, not as performance, but as presence, not as energy, but as wholeness. And the person who once took the pill to feel like themselves may one day wake and realize they are here, still tired, maybe still healing, but here, and that is enough. Memory is not a library. It is not a shelf of facts. It is a garden of sensations. When the brain remembers, it does not open a file. It opens a feeling. It touches the texture of what once was. The smell of winter in childhood. The sound of a voice long gone. The warmth of sunlight on a kitchen floor. These are not stored as language. They are stored as presence. And methamphetamine, like all intense experience, leaves its imprint there, not just as a moment, but as a sensation the brain learns to recognize, to miss, to want, because meth does not just feel good. It feels real, more vivid, more urgent, more alive. The first time someone takes it, their brain lights up with such certainty that the memory carves deep, like a footprint in wet cement. And even if they never take it again, that feeling waits, not because the person is weak, but because the brain is honest. It remembers what felt powerful, and it whispers that memory back in moments of weakness, or boredom, or pain. It doesn't say, take the drug again. It says, remember that moment when everything was clear. And that whisper is hard to ignore, because it feels like truth, even when it's not, even when it leads back to harm. This is what makes recovery so complex. You can remove the substance. You can heal the body. You can sleep again, eat again, laugh again, but the memory remains, coiled like a thread in the mind. A smell, a song, a street, and suddenly, the garden stirs, the neurons flare, the body tightens, the desire returns, not because of willpower, not because of choice, but because memory is alive. It does not forget what once felt like survival. But here is the quiet hope. The brain also remembers other things: safety, slowness, love, joy without condition, laughter that comes from presence, not performance. These memories, too, can be watered, grown, rebuilt. The trick is not to fight the old ones, but to plant new ones beside them, so that over time, when the whisper comes, remember what helped, another voice can answer, yes, but remember what healed. And that voice, though softer, can grow louder. If we let it, the molecule may have left the body, but the memory does not have to hold power. It can be acknowledged, gently, without fear, without shame. And in that acknowledgement, something shifts. The memory remains, but the craving loosens, because you are no longer reaching for the past. You are building something new. And slowly, that becomes the memory. That becomes the self. And that is enough. What kind of world makes a molecule like meth feel necessary? Not just to soldiers, or patients, or those in pain, but to students, mothers, workers, artists, doctors. You. What kind of world rewards speed so deeply that even the body's cries for rest are labeled inefficient? Methamphetamine did not create this world. It only obeyed its logic. A logic that says, move faster, wake earlier, sleep less, earn more, smile while doing it, be sharper, be better, be on. And if you're not, take something: caffeine, energy drinks, supplements, stimulants, smart pills, prescriptions, or in darker corners, crystals passed from palm to palm. Because anything is better than slowing down. In a world like this, meth is not the cause. It is the symptom, the reflection. It does not knock down doors. It is welcomed in, offered a seat at the table, given a task, expected to deliver. And it does, for a time. But the body remembers, and the soul, even buried, still asks, what if I stopped? What if I closed my eyes? What if I let go? And in that pause, there is something radical. Because rest, in this world, is not weakness. It is rebellion. It is a quiet reclaiming of rhythm, the kind of rhythm that does not need artificial light, that follows the sun, the breath, the beating of a human heart, unplugged from alarms. Meth cannot exist in that rhythm, not because it is evil, but because it was made for a different tempo. The tempo of war, of panic, of impossible deadlines, of endless growth. But you are not endless. You are made of cycles, of tension and release, of activity and sleep, of light and shadow. And when you honor those cycles, you do not become less. You become more whole. You remember things that speed made you forget. How the air feels when you're not rushing, how music tastes when you're not distracted, how deep a breath can go when it's not fighting the clock. Rest is not a retreat. It is a return to presence, to feeling, to self, and in a world that trains you to outrun yourself. To pause is the bravest thing you can do. Not everyone can stop, not all at once. Some are still tangled in need, in fear, in chemistry, but even they, even you, can begin again with a single pause, a single night of sleep, a single moment of stillness, held without guilt, because healing does not come in sprints. It arrives slowly, like morning, like silence after a storm, like memory returning to its rightful place. And when it does, you may see the world differently, not as something to race through, but as something to rest inside, even for a while, even just tonight. So now, we return to quiet, not because the story is finished, but because it no longer needs to move. We've followed a shape, not a person, not a headline, not a crime. A shape, a molecule, simple, sharp, enduring. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen. That's all it was. And yet, it passed through so many hands. Through Berlin laboratories lit by pale glass. Through field kits pressed against trembling bodies. Through syringes beneath velvet chandeliers. Through pharmacies. Through policies. Through poems and panic. And it did not change. Only we did. We renamed it. Feared it. Needed it. Forgot it. Found it again. We used it to win wars. To make deadlines. To stay awake in classrooms and factories and marriages that felt like they would collapse without momentum. We asked a molecule to do what only rest, only community, only compassion could ever really do. And when it didn't work, we blamed the molecule. But meth never promised peace. It only promised energy. And energy, untethered from wisdom, can burn everything. Still, this isn't a warning or a sermon. It's just a breath, a reminder that science holds stories, and stories hold people. And people, even those lost in the cycle, even those who gave up sleep for survival, are more than their chemistry. They are not broken, just rewritten. And stories can be rewritten again. Like cells regrowing, like memories replanting themselves, like sleep returning after years of forgetting how. If you've made it here, thank you. You've walked softly through something few ever speak about. Not just a drug, but a century of desire. The desire to be better, to do more, to keep going, to matter. And maybe, in the quiet now, we remember something gentler. That to matter is not to move, not to conquer, not to chase, but to exist, to rest, to heal, and to wake, not in panic, but in presence. That is the science too. Not just molecules, but mercy. Healing does not come in headlines. It arrives in whispers. And after meth leaves the body, after the trembling, the aching, the weeks of no sleep and too much sleep, something else begins. A kind of rebuilding. Not loud, not cinematic, but cellular, slow, steady, sacred. The brain, long flooded with artificial light, must now learn to see in the dark again. Its dopamine systems, once hyper-tuned to reward, must relearn what joy feels like when it comes gently, not in waves, but in ripples. At first, the world feels gray. Food has no flavor. Laughter arrives late. Nothing feels worth doing. But this is not depression. This is recalibration. The receptors are returning. The neurons are speaking softly again. The balance is being restored. Imagine a field after wildfire. The ground looks barren, charred, lifeless. But beneath the soil, roots are stirring. New shoots are rising. Unseen. So too with the mind. Sleep begins to return. Not restful at first, filled with strange dreams. Startles, sweats, flickers. But then, one night, you sleep through and wake not in panic, but in quiet. And for a moment, you remember what it was to simply exist. The body also repairs. Skin regains its softness. Digestion finds its rhythm. The heart no longer races. At every moment of stillness, and emotions, the ones that were silenced, begin to speak. They do not always say kind things. There is guilt, shame, sadness, but there is also memory, hope, tenderness. Feelings that meth once drowned now rise to the surface, like forgotten songs, and they are not a threat. They are proofs that you are still alive, still here, still worth healing. This process is not linear. There are setbacks, relapses, dark days, but the brain does not hold grudges. It does not close doors. It just needs time. Time to prune, to regrow, to remember, and eventually, a morning comes when the craving is quieter, when the thought passes without action, when the stillness feels safe. And in that moment, however brief, you are not recovering from meth. You are simply recovering yourself. And that is more than enough. There is no single story, only echoes, variations, local myths wrapped around the same molecule. In Germany, it began as science, a tablet for focus, a war machine's fuel. But in Japan, it came home in silence. After World War II, with the nation shattered and occupied, methamphetamine was no longer just for soldiers. It spilled into the streets. Called Hirapon, it was marketed to civilians as a work enhancer, a helper for the exhausted, a spark for the defeated. Factories opened. Bottles were sold over the counter. Students, laborers, mothers, all were encouraged to do more, feel better, rebuild faster. Because Japan, like many nations after war, believed in motion. Stillness felt like surrender, and hereupon delivered, until it didn't. By the early 1950s, addiction rates soared. Withdrawals, hallucinations, psychotic breaks. The government moved to ban it, but the molecule had already rooted itself. It went underground, illicit, hidden, whispered. It remains there still, a quiet part of Japan's chemical shadow. Then in Thailand, a different name, yabat. It means crazy medicine, a pill mixed with caffeine, bright in color, bitter on the tongue, popular among laborers, truck drivers, night workers, those who must stay awake when the world tells them not to. For a time, it was normalized, a tool, not a threat, but overuse spread, and the myth hardened, not as medicine, but as madness. Police raids, strict sentencing, a war on users. But still, the pills move, because the need remains. The nights are still long, the labor is still heavy, and meth, like always, works. In the United States, the story shifts again, from pharmacy to farmland, from prescription pad to backwoods lab. Meth became rural, a chemical symptom of vanishing jobs, long commutes, and empty towns. In the Midwest, in the South, in trailer parks and ranch houses, it became a currency, not just for escape, but for endurance, to stay awake during double shifts, to forget a shrinking future, to feel capable, even for a moment. And again, the system responded with punishment, not repair, not care, just jail and shame, as if the molecule were the disease, and not the world it answered to. Every culture that touched meth revealed something about itself, its expectations, its values, its breaking points. In some places, meth was a gift. In others, a curse. Sometimes both. But always, it was a mirror. And what it showed was not just addiction. It showed need. Relentless need. For speed. For escape. For dignity. For something. Anything. That worked. And meth, quietly, consistently, offered that, no matter the language, no matter the border, just a molecule, fitting into receptors it never should have reached, and staying long, after it was wanted. But maybe, if we look at those patterns, we don't just see pain, we see something deeper. A shared story, told in chemistry, across continents, across lives, and in that, a kind of understanding begins. We want to be better, vaster, sharper, more capable, more present. It's not a flaw. It's not even greed. It's longing, the quiet kind, to keep up, to matter, to do something well before the clock runs out. And for as long as we've had tools, we've pointed them inward. Eyeglasses for fading sight, caffeine for early mornings, L-Dopa for the trembling hand, Ritalin for wandering focus, Disoxin for the brain that drifts or slows or stalls. Is that wrong? Not always. Not at first, because sometimes a molecule brings clarity, real relief, a door that was once locked, now quietly open. The problem isn't help. The problem is the shape of the help we demand. We don't want balance. We want more energy, more productivity, more certainty. And when the body can't give it, we reach for chemistry. Meth was once prescribed to make people functional, to make tired men march, to help mothers get out of bed, to silence hunger, to quiet emotion, to allow movement when nothing else would. But where does that end? When does improvement become replacement? When does support become dependence? Not just on the drug, but on the idea that you are not enough without it, that your natural rhythm is flawed, that rest is failure, that softness is something to medicate. This is the real danger of enhancement, not the molecule, but the belief that anything less than optimization is a problem to solve. And meth, with its clean structure and urgent results, answered that belief too perfectly. It didn't just help people function. It told them they should never stop functioning. And when they tried to stop, the world kept asking for more. That is not medicine. That is machinery. And we are not machines. We forget this in our culture of upgrades, in our metrics, in our polished identities. But beneath all that, we are still made of rhythm, cycles, flesh, emotion. We were not designed for constant output. We were made for fluctuation, for feeling, for falling down and standing again. Enhancement is not evil, but it must begin with compassion, with listening, with the question, is this helping me become myself, or someone I think the world will accept more easily? And if the answer comes from fear, or shame, or pressure, then no molecule, no matter how perfect, can make it safe, because chemistry cannot replace kindness, and improvement without grace is just another kind of erasure. Even meth was once a miracle, until we asked it to do what only love could do. And it tried, and it broke us, because that was never its role. It is a tool, not a compass, not a cure for loneliness, not a way to erase your edges. You were always enough, not optimized, but whole, before the pill, before the war, before the whisper of enhancement. There was sleep, not a failure, not a luxury, not something to schedule, just a rhythm. The body, heavier at night, the eyes, flickering, the thoughts, softening into something wordless. Sleep was never optional. It was never inefficient. It was sacred. Every animal knows it. Every tree obeys its seasons. Even oceans rest in tides. But meth did not understand. It cut through the rhythm. It held back the darkness. It said, not yet. It kept the mind alert, long after it wanted to drift. It flooded the system with false daylight. It drowned the melatonin in noise. Sleep didn't fight back. It just left. And when sleep leaves, the world changes. Memories stop consolidating. Emotions lose their anchor. Faces become harder to recognize. Joy becomes mechanical. Without REM, we forget how to feel. Without deep sleep, the body forgets how to heal. Meth steals hours, then days, then weeks of that repair. It tells the body, keep going, even when every cell begs, please stop. And when it's gone, when the molecule fades, sleep does not return all at once. It creeps in, uneven, disturbed. Dreams flicker like broken film. The body twitches, as if unsure it is allowed to rest. But it is. It always was. And over time, the rhythm remembers. The breath deepens. The cycles return. REM rises like tidewater. And dreams, not the fractured ones, but the soft ones, begin again. A childhood hallway, a forgotten hand, a sky full of stars you didn't know you remembered. Sleep is not just repair. It is reunion. With memory, with emotion, with the self untouched by performance. Meth made people fear sleep. Because rest looked like weakness. Because slowing down meant losing. But the truth is, sleep is strength. Not the kind you measure. The kind you feel. When you wake, not with panic, but with presence. And that's the real healing. Not just getting sober, not just stopping a drug, but learning to close your eyes. Without fear, to enter the dark. Without punishment, to let the world fall away, so the mind can find its own shape again. There is science in that. There is grace in that. There is you in that. Sleep is not surrender. It is the oldest kind of knowing. The body's way of saying, you're safe, you're enough, let go now. And that is where recovery begins. This was never just about meth. It was about longing for energy, for control, for light in long hours, for clarity in noise. The molecule answered a question we didn't know we were asking. How can I keep going, even when I can't? And it worked. Too well. It helped soldiers march, helped mothers rise, helped workers finish the shift, helped students stay awake. But the cost was silence. Silence in the body, silence in the self, the silence that grows when we stop listening to what we need and only chase what we must become. Meth didn't make us fragile. It exposed the fragility we were taught to hide. That we are tired, that we are scared, that we want to feel enough. It told us we could feel that way. Without rest, without care, without softness. It lied, gently, efficiently, and we believed it. But now we know that no pill can replace presence, that no surge of dopamine can take you who you are. And still, we can forgive ourselves for trying, for needing, for not knowing, because at its heart, this story was never about weakness. It was about humanity, imperfect, messy, wired for hope. Even now, after all the damage, after all the years, people recover, not because they are strong, but because they remember. They remember who they were. Before the flood, before the fight, before the sleep disappeared. And when they do, they begin again, this time slower, with fewer expectations, with hands that shake, with eyes that blink in soft light. And the molecule, it fades, not as a villain, not as a curse, but as something that was once invited and is now gently let go. Its power was real, its story vast, but you are larger still, larger than your chemistry, stronger than your habits, softer than you think. And tonight, as you lie in your bed, perhaps something quiet stirs. Not fear, Not urgency, but stillness. The kind that waits for no permission. The kind that whispers, "You're safe now. You can rest. You made it here." And maybe that's all we ever needed to hear.